Hi, and welcome to a noob-friendly guide to the universe of Mechwarrior. This is the first episode. It's going to look at the Battlemech. I'm sure I'll do a couple of others, probably talk about some of the history and lore. There are so many videos out there, but they're really dry and really terrible, and I'm pretty sure in one of them, a guy was masturbating under the desk. So, know that I am not masturbating while I do this, and already, this video is an improvement. My job here with this is to sort of give this a bit of spark, a bit of life, because it can be such a dry and boring game to talk about. A lot of people talk about it like it's a military simulator or something, and you know, it's like talking to someone about World War history, you know, and it's not quite the same. Please note that all credits are given to the pictures somewhere on the page where the pictures are. So here we go. Without further ado, let's start talking about the Battlemech. So the Battlemech is the core of Mechwarrior BattleTech universe, and that's why I thought I'd start with it, right? So if you want to play Mechwarrior or BattleTech, you're going to want to get into, understanding that Battlemechs are pretty badass, right? Battlemechs, or mechs as they're called, are giant walking tanks. They're like, they've got locomotion. They're tanks, not robots. I know a lot of people look at them as like, you're playing with robots. It's not robots. They're meant to be tanks. They have electronic muscles called myoma, sort of underneath the armor plating. They also have like a internal structure, which is, made of different things. They also run on fusion power, which generates a lot of heat. Though some mechs, like industrial mechs, run on an internal combustion engine. Again, heat is a big issue for that sort of a thing. They're weighed in tons, and they come in 4 different classes: light, medium, heavy, assault. And it's very easy to find a breakdown of which tonnage comes into which class. We're just going to talk quickly about what the classes are, right? So the first class is the light mechs. They're very fast moving, but they're often very fragile. Usually they have limited weapons or a small special ability. They're sort of like a one-trick pony, you know? They've got one really cool thing that they can do, but usually they're not likely to pull that off. So you're going to use these for recon, for scouting, or maybe as a specialist in your army. So you might have something with like an ECM, which is like electronic countermeasures. There's a big bubble shield thing, stops people from targeting you. That might be, your one trick. Or the Spider, for instance, it moves very fast with its jump jets and gets around. It's got pretty much nothing else about it, right? And so these things, you're going to have one trick that you're going to pull off with them. Medium mechs, they're sort of a bit more versatile. They're mid-ranged usually, so they're fast enough to be useful and heavy enough to have a few options on board, but they're still not very strong. That you're going to use them for low-level skirmishes. They're not super tanky, but they're tanky enough to be able to put up a fight. If a small fight comes to them, right? Heavy mechs, they're sort of like, if you play online games, they're like the DPS class of mech. So they often have average to slow speeds, but they have a buttload of weapons. There's a lot of options, very versatile. Now, because they've got that weight range, that's not necessarily always true. Sometimes they might have fewer weapons and a lot more speed and a lot more armor or whatever. Like there's a lot more options with the heavy mechs, and these are the ones that you're probably going to be using the most, or at least these are the ones that you're going to be the most effective with, is your heavy mechs, because they have that many options, because they have so many tricks up their sleeve. These are used for large-scale engagements and general combat overall, so they're not normally like utility mechs. They're usually specifically targeted for war and playing the game of destroying other mechs. And then finally you have assault mechs. They're juggernauts. They've got heavy armor, they've got heavy weapons. They are very, very scary. Never underestimate an assault mech. These are when you absolutely need to destroy everything on the board, everything in the game, and still take a beating. They can be some of the most powerful mechs in the game, but they're not unstoppable. And if you see them and you have lighter mechs, you're probably going to want to target your fire on those and get rid of them as best as you can, So, different factions have different flavors of mech, right? So you got to start with the first division. The first division is Inner Sphere Tech and Clan Technology, right? So Inner Sphere is sort of like the great houses of Earth and all the rest of it that have gone out into space. We'll talk more about that in another video. And Clan Tech is these very superior, super duper fighters who have gone off and built this warrior culture and then have come back to invade the Inner Sphere, which is the place in which we live, right? So each Inner Sphere house has different designs, and they design their mech very differently. clan mechs. Each clan will have their own flavor as well, but generally, they're used quite versatilely across all different clans. So especially frontline mechs, there'll be either frontline mechs or second line mechs. Frontline mechs are mechs used by all clans. Second line mechs are designed usually for use in a specific clan to deal with their specific way of fighting. Okay, so each mech has different variants. Each variant will probably have a unique model number, especially if it's in the inner sphere. And model number usually tells you which house designed it, or if it's a clan or whatever. So just before I move on, the other thing that I'd say here is, what is a variant, which isn't really talked about, but basically you have the same chassis of mech, which is, the type of mech, so maybe it's an Atlas, or maybe it's a, Marauder or whatever. And then the kind of weapons and special equipment, and sometimes the amount of armor and engines that are in it, will be different depending upon who designed it. So that's what I'm talking about when I say variants. Alright, so the first faction that I'd talk about here is probably Lyran Commonwealth. As they're the go-to sort of example of how things are built for a specific way. So models made in Lyran Commonwealth will have an S as their model number, ending in S for Steiner, which is their great house that they're representing. They tend to sacrifice speed in favor of firepower and armor. So these ones have heavy armor, chunky weapons, but they're generally very slow. The other thing that they're not good at is sinking heat, right, which we talked about before. It generates heat, and often they will overheat or have to take a turn to cool themselves down and things like that. They're very tanky, but they tend to heat up super quickly, and that's important to consider. If you're brand new to Mechwarrior, I would recommend checking out Davian. They're not for everyone, they weren't for me, but they're the most well-rounded, all-rounder sort of mechs that are out there. You can tell that they're for Federated Sons or House Davian because they'll have D usually ending in their name. They tend to be good for sort of all purposes. They've got a good balance of armor, firepower, movement, heat. Like they're the entry level demonstration mech, as it were. They tend to be designed for combined arms operations, so they work well with other kinds of mechs. So rather than just being a liability or the only one to carry the team, they work well as in a combination of stuff. They're very easy to pick up and learn, very versatile in most situations, but I think when you get to higher levels of play, they can be a bit trickier to master. But by all means, check out Davian. They're a cool faction. Another great faction is Draconis Combine. These guys are like the samurai of the world. They have such a great sense of honor, which when they're dealing with clans, that was one of the strongest parts of the fluff in that sense. They end with a K for House Karita. And they tend to have a lot more special equipment and gadgets, right? And they have strong weapons and a good balance of armor, usually. And the reason for that is because in the fluff, they're the first ones to find all this hidden technology and stuff like that, and revive the technology. They're like in charge of the technology renaissance. So they have a lot of great special equipment. It's a good way to learn special abilities, but they can be weaker in the wrong hands if you're not using those special abilities to their full potential. You can be wasting points, and your mech can be a bit of a liability to you and your gameplay style. So just be aware of that. But unlike other factions, which we'll see in a second, these guys only usually have like 1 or 2 gadgets per mech. So it's a good way to start introducing yourself to those special abilities. House Marek, this is my favorite team. Their models are made by the Free Worlds League, which is an ally to the Draconis Combine. So they often have some level of special abilities as well, but not all of them. They tend to prefer energy weapons rather than ballistic weapons, though that being said, they like the fluff is that they don't have the facility to make the best level of energy weapons, so they often make up for that by having more of the sort of medium quality energy weapons. And some also have full ballistic stuff like the Orion, which is one of their personal mechs, right? One of their most famous mechs. they're balanced with speed and armor generally, though also, again, they don't have the greatest heat sink ability, so they can be somewhat fragile, but it's a good balance for beginners. I like this faction for beginners. I like this faction for experts as well. But just be aware, you have to pick the right mech for the right situation. And if you're not paying attention to where the, I guess, where the special abilities are lying in your mechs, then again, like all mechs with special abilities, you're going to be struggling with that. So as a beginner, just be aware that you need to think about what your mech is going to be if you're going to go with the Free Worlds League. House Liao. So this is probably one of the hardest factions to play of the Inner Sphere. They're models made by the Confederation, the Capellan Confederation, sorry, and they have models ending in R for House Liao. Now, you might go in your head, that's very racist, but the reason for that, I'm almost certain, is because the letter L looks a lot like the number 1, right? And you're talking about like a serial number, like, you know, STH-3L. It could look like a 1, you know, if there's a misprint or something like that, or if it's in lowercase. So I'm pretty confident that's the reason why R is for House Liao. I could be completely wrong. It could be some other thing. If you know, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. But also, I think that sort of matches up, because they're meant to be Chinese and Korean, and in those languages, Mandarin and Hangul, R and L use the same letter, so I'm guessing that's why it is. Enough of a speech about that near racist issue there. They tend to have a lot more special equipment, like buttloads of special equipment, and they focus on maneuverability and stealth and using those things to their advantage. So if you're a brand new player, that's very, very tricky to wrap your head around, to understand that you have to be moving a certain amount and have to end your turn, making use of the terrain, making use of the cover, that sort of stuff. But if you are able to wrap your head around that, because maybe you're an experienced wargamer or whatever, and you've done a bit of your homework, you can punch well above your weight with House Liao mechs, right? You can take down much heavier mechs with that, right? So just be aware that they are very tricky for new players, though if you get really good at it, or if you're playing a game like Alpha Strike or Mechwarrior Clicks, chances are that you'll get that'll be a bit of an easier learning curve for you, but just be aware of that. Okay, so let's move on quickly to clan mechs. So clan mechs are generally far superior in every single way. They have better maneuverability, better guns, better lasers, better armor, better heat dissipation. They have, originally, they were the only ones with the case technology, so if things exploded, everything wouldn't go everywhere. But the downside to that is that they cost a shitload more points to put on the board. Sometimes double, some of them are even triple of the equivalent Inner Sphere mechs, right? So just keep that in mind. It can be great to play a star of clan mechs, which is a group of clan mechs, right? It can be awesome fun, but it's going to come at a cost. And some of the armies I've built, even just a small sort of medium army, so for them in fluff terms they get 5 mechs, where Inner Sphere get 4 mechs, so you're going to end up running with 4 lances, which is what the Inner Sphere is called, like 4 groups of usually high level mechs to your 1 group of mechs if you run clans, but you have the technology to be able to take it down, so just be aware of that. Clan versions of Inner Sphere mechs usually have a model number ending in C for clan, pretty straightforward. Mechs built by a clan, they don't have model numbers at all, right? So their variants are sort of based off the chronological order of when they were designed, and they'll be like Prime is the first one, then A, B, C, D, etc. Base is just the chassis with no loadout at all, right? No weapons and armor. Frontline mechs are used by all the clans, and they're also known as Omni-mechs, which there are other Omni-mechs, but they have a thing. That's a whole other story. You don't need to worry about that because you're a new player, right? Second line mechs are usually built for a specific clan, though they can be shared across clans, right? So each clan does have their own flavor. So for instance, Clan Wolf, which you can see on the top left there, Smoke Jaguars and Jade Falcon. Jade Falcon's on the bottom left also. They tend to be more aggressive because they're, you know, Crusader clans, they're invading clans and stuff like that. So their attack style is about offense, right? Other factions like Clan Ghost Bear, Snow Raven, Diamond Shark, they tend to be a bit more defensive, and more relying on having, you know, the life bar, the health bar to survive at the amount of armor. You know, having the tricks up their sleeve, like Snow Raven loves having tricks up their sleeve. So there are heaps more clans. You can learn more about them in the field menus to the clans. You can learn more about them in the role-playing books and stuff like that. Check them out. But just be aware that each one does have their own flavor, and that influences the mechs that they have, right? So the best approach when learning battle mechs is to work about which faction sort of interests you. So I've just listed out some of the styles here. These are vague stereotypes. You can find all sorts of mechs in all sorts of factions. So don't feel that if I've said something but you really want to play one particular thing, don't feel like you can't do that. Also, a lot of factions use sort of cross-faction mechs as well. So, for instance, House Marek will often use a lot of Karita faction mechs because they're in an alliance. They'll also use a lot of Steiner mechs because they share a border with Steiner and they do a lot of fighting there, so they have a lot of salvage stuff. So don't stress too much about that. But if you generally feel like playing a certain style, pick that faction because it'll generally have better mechs for you to choose from. When choosing mechs to play, think about what you want it to do and prioritize the mechs that can do that particular thing. So if you want a lot of fast movement, you're probably going to be picking medium and light mechs which have that move speed, that have that jump capability, right? If you want mechs that deal a buttload of damage and take a beating, you're probably going to want the assault mechs. You're probably going to want Lyran mechs, right? Stuff like that. So just be aware of that. If you don't want to have to worry about heat, then you might think about playing Davian mechs or playing some, some of the clan mechs or whatever it is. Look at the record sheets rather than the fluff. If you go to the technical readouts, which is the official book which all the details come in, you're going to have a bad time because they put a lot of fluff in there. What I would recommend you do is learn what a record sheet looks like and what it does. Maybe I'll make a video for that if you'd like that. Comment down below. And, look for the stats. That's not something I normally tell gamers, but in this case, the fluff is so expansive, you'll never be able to decipher what it is. When you are more experienced, the fluff is going to give you a clue as to the purpose of a particular mech, right? You're going to find out that a spider is used specifically for recon and, its maneuverability is the key thing. You're going to find out all the different ideas of why these mechs came to be, and that influenced the actual game designers who designed the stats, and that influences you as to how the stats are best used, right? But otherwise, have fun and look for ways to engage with the game. Look for the things that you love. I love some of the stories and the fluff there. I also love the idea of, these dueling warriors, these mercenaries. Find ways to engage with the game regardless of the stats. Play the computer games. They can be very helpful as a gateway, not just into the mechs, but also into the storyline and the world, particularly Mechwarrior 3 and 4. Mechwarrior 3 focuses very strongly on sort of like fighting clans, and Mechwarrior 4 sort of gives you that feel of running a mercenary company, specifically Mechwarrior 4 mercenaries. Mechwarrior 4, I can't remember what they're on, is Vengeance or something. It also is good, but it teaches you more about the civil war between the Lyran Alliance and the Federated Sons. So you can learn a lot from that way. Try to find friends who play, who have good communication skills to teach you about the mechs without turning into a war history lecture. I know there are a lot of people out there who don't know how to talk about games to people who really aren't into that particular game yet, right? They don't have those communication skills. Find someone who does, who plays the game, or if you want to talk to me, by all means, let me know and I'll talk to you, not a problem. So that's pretty much it for this first episode. I hope this was helpful. If you want more information, try looking in the Mechwarrior Guide 2 books, the Field Manual books, any of the Mechwarrior RPG Companion books, particularly the second edition, and just, Google it. Look for interesting things. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comment section below. We're coming up on 20 minutes. This is a long video. I'll try not to make them this long. Let me know how long you think they should be. Thank you very much.